So hello everybody and welcome to another episode of the Bootcast. I'm your host Eugene Devereaux, and joining me today all the way from Australia is Amanda Kendle. So Amanda, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you very much for having me all the way over there.
You're welcome, you're welcome. Amanda, so let's get straight into it. So whereabouts are you at the moment then? And
Well, I'm here in Perth, Western Australia. So they say it's one of the most isolated cities in the world because it's very, very far to the next city. So
really,
beautiful place, but really far. Yeah, yeah. Like the nearest city is Adelaide, which is, like a 3.5 hour flight. In fact, Bali is just a smidgen closer than Adelaide.
Jeez, I didn't know that.
It's crazy.
Learn something new every day.
Yeah.
So what is it that what's your kind of primary career, I suppose?
Well, I wear a lot of hats because I like to do a lot of different things, but probably the most important part and the thing I'm passionate about is I run a travel blog and a travel podcast. And besides that, I kind of connected and also unconnected. I run social media and blogging training and workshops and work with clients to help them improve the way they promote their businesses or their work.
Brilliant. And which of those kind of two different things came first? Were you more so into the social
Mm.
media and blogging and stuff before you got the urge or the desire to travel? Or
No, the traveling came first and the travel blog came first, and all of the rest of my business derived from that. So,
right,
yeah,
so
yeah.
kind of grew
So,
organically. That's brilliant.
yes, it was perfect. Yeah, I'm very lucky.
We'll get to the biggest life lessons because I know there's many there for you. Um, but just why did you start traveling in the first place?
Well, good question. So, I can blame my parents for that. So, they started taking us traveling when I was about 9. Here in Australia, we have this magical thing called long service leave. So if you work for a company for nowadays, it's about 10 years, you can get 3 months off paid.
Jeez.
So my dad had been working for the bank for many, many years, and he was able to have 6 months off fully paid.
Yeah.
So we took off, flew to London in the first place, bought a camper van motorhome, and drove around Europe for 6 months when I was
Class.
9. So yeah,
Jeez.
that gave me, especially coming from, an isolated part of Australia, to
Yeah.
suddenly see, you can drive and then you'll be in a new country with a new language and new
Yeah.
currency back then and new foods. That was absolutely eye-opening. So that's where the travel bug really came from.
Cool. So you started in London and kind of obviously got a ferry then to France or somewhere.
A hovercraft, in fact, I remember it well.
Really? Yeah.
I don't know. I think it doesn't run anymore. I'm not sure, but yeah. So France, Spain,
Yeah. Yeah.
Italy, Greece, and then it was it was a long time ago. It was 1985, so
Yeah. Yeah.
definitely kind of Cold War time. We didn't get to the eastern side at all, but back up through
Yeah.
Austria, Switzerland, Germany, Netherlands, up through Scandinavia, and then ferry back to Scotland, and then eventually across to Ireland. I remember the ferry crossing to Ireland really well. It was very bumpy. And then back to London. So, and
Cool.
home.
And do you
Yeah.
remember much about Ireland or?
I've been back to Ireland a couple of times since, so it's hard to be sure, but
Yeah.
I remember loving it. So I have quite a lot of Irish ancestry. So it seemed like an important place to be. So yeah. And it was, I don't know, it was very green compared to home. That's
Yeah.
one thing I remember for sure. And friendly people.
Ah, thank you. um, what's been your best travel moment to date then?
Oh, um, there are a lot, but I guess I can nail down a couple that were particularly important.
Yeah.
One special moment was special few weeks. I took the Trans-Siberian Railway from Vladivostok across Russia, so up to
Oh,
Moscow and eventually to St. Petersburg. And it's something I dreamed about doing for many, many years. I'd read about it, seen documentaries, and, I was really something. It was a really, big goal to aspire to. And eventually I'd been living in Japan and I needed to get to Europe to get to my next job. And so,
yeah.
of course, obvious way from Japan to Europe, I don't know, it was our obvious way, was to take the Trans-Siberian, and it was amazing. So we spent three
Class.
weeks, getting on and off. And
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, we were always the only foreigners on the train, and it was brilliant. So yeah,
Jeez. And so would
that
you
was
like,
amazing.
would you like stay? Would you hop off and maybe stay a night or two en route? That kind of.
Yeah. So we had to
Uh,
have it all like planned in advance because you had to do that to be able to get your visa. You had to be specific about where you were staying and stuff. So, but we stayed in homestays along the way. So I think probably 4 times we got off, I think. And each time we would stay 2 or 3 nights, depending on where it was, in a homestay, and then
yeah,
hop back on the train and keep going. So it was really fascinating. Yeah.
cool. And what would be the highlight if you could pick one of the?
It's really hard. Like Lake Baikal is amazing because it's this, absolutely enormous freshwater lake, and it just you're coming on the train and suddenly, everyone's already hanging out the window because they know it's coming, and we didn't
Mm,
really know it was coming, but we figured they must be looking at something,
yeah,
and then there it is, and then we stayed like near the shore of the lake for 2 or 3 nights, and that was pretty
jeez.
amazing. But also just the people we met because not many people traveled the whole distance,
Mm,
and we were getting on and off as well. And so, we're in a berth of four, and there was me and my boyfriend at the time. So there was often one or two other locals in there with us, and that was really interesting because they had not usually met any Australians before.
yeah,
And we met kids on the train who spent the whole week on the train going across to somewhere near Vladivostok where they'd have a beach holiday for the summer, and then a week on the train going back. And they always wanted to play card games with us and stuff. And it was great. Yeah, it was just, yeah, it
brilliant.
was a really interesting way to experience Russia.
Cool. And Lake Baikal, it's funny that you mentioned that because one of my previous guests, an Irish guy, Gary O'Keefe, he's on a world record mission at the moment to drive across Lake Baikal because it's
Oh,
frozen.
when it's
Um,
frozen. Wow.
it's crazy. Like so they've built this custom van, this UAZ van, and there's a
Oh my
team of
gosh.
team of motorbike team of bikers with him, and it's a pretty big deal. They've had to get sponsors on board, and they have like a documentary filmmaker. He was famous for The Long Way Around. This was a
Oh, yeah. I
Claudio
know the
Van
long way around.
yeah Claudio Van Planta. So he's actually the documentary filmmaker for this as well. So it's
Wow.
it's
That's a
amazing.
big deal.
They're out there at the moment. So it's crazy what they're attempting to do. So hopefully they get there in one piece. It's
Yeah.
interesting that you
Wow.
mentioned that Lake Baikal.
Yes, how funny. And it's rare that I
Yeah,
talk about like Baikal, even though it was, yeah, so
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
meant to be. That's so funny.
Jeez.
But yeah, when I was there, it was summer. So it was,
Yeah.
although the water was still really cold. We were, where we were staying, there was this German guy there who came every year, and he went swimming in it every day. But like we dipped our toes in, it was freezing. So he was just
Jesus.
really, really tough, hardcore guy.
That's crazy. And then on the opposite side, what has been your worst travel moment to date? Worst
Yeah, I
experience?
was trying to think about this. I don't honestly, I have to say I don't think I've had any terrible travel moments. So
Yeah.
like when things go wrong, they generally turn into a bit of an adventure story that, is kind of a funny story to tell afterwards. And I mean, fortunately, I've never had anything like really awful go wrong. I've never been
Yeah.
in a natural disaster or a terrible accident or
Yeah.
something. So I honestly have to say I have never really had a worst travel moment.
What would be your favorite place on earth then?
Oh, it's hard. there's there's a few that really stand out for me. I can't give you one answer, sorry, but
Please.
well, there's this particular place in Iceland, a mountain called Kirkjufell in
Okay.
the west coast, and that was just one of those amazing places. We stayed in a cabin on the side of the mountain, and the views were incredible. And it was the middle of summer, so it was daylight the whole night long. And I don't know, it's just one of those places that I really long to return to because it was
Yeah.
just really inspiring. So that's probably one of my favorites. The other is definitely Japan. So I lived in
Japan,
Japan for
yeah.
a couple of years.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I love everything about Japan, the people, the food, the sights, the culture, the language. It's just fabulous. So I lived there for a
Mm.
couple of years and I've been back a few times since. And I will keep going back because there's always more.
Yeah.
It's just one of those, layer upon layer kind of destinations. And it's so different, it's really
Mm.
unique and different to anywhere else I've been. So.
It's funny because a guy I met in Vietnam, he's an American guy, but he speaks Japanese, and he's back in Japan now. He's a teacher there, but teaching English, but he's kind of fluent in a couple of languages. But he said the same, that Japan is, it's kind of like it's not like the rest of Asia. Like, would
Mm.
you agree
Absolutely,
with
it's
that? Or
completely different. Yeah.
yeah,
I mean, I think there's some similarities between Japan and South Korea, I
mm,
find, and even Taiwan to some extent. They, if you have to say it's similar to anywhere, it's those two,
yeah,
but it's completely different to Southeast Asia in every way,
yeah,
and different to China. Yeah, it's really very unique, and I think because it was very closed off to the rest of the world for a long time, so it's managed to
mm,
stay quite unique, and the people have a very unique personality,
yeah,
and the food, oh my goodness, the food is, like what we see as Japanese food out in like what we
yeah,
get here in Australia, it's great, but it's like 5% of what they actually have on offer in Japan. There's
yeah,
just
yeah.
all these other parts of their cuisine that, oh, they're so good.
Brilliant. What would be your favorite place in Australia then?
Oh, there's lots of good places in Australia too. I can't say one, but I'll give you a couple, just a short couple. Probably my favorite like region or state is Tasmania. So it's, it's much smaller. Like the
Yeah,
most of Australia is just vast, and there's a lot of distance between anywhere. But
mm,
Tasmania is somewhere you can drive from top to bottom in a day, which is amazing for
yeah,
us, and it's really varied. So normally, you can drive 500 kilometers in Australia and nothing changes, but in Tasmania it constantly changes. So
yeah,
I've been there, I think 3 or 4 times. I always love it. Uluru,
mm,
Ayers Rock in the middle, is like a really special place. It's a reason why lots of people go there, even though it's, thousands of kilometers from anywhere. But also Western Australia, my home state, is lesser visited because it's so far from everywhere, but it is full of amazing, beautiful, beautiful places. So,
cool.
um, yeah, that's my that's my attempt at telling you a favorite place in Australia.
And just on that, I suppose, like, the whole world has seen in the past couple of months the terrible atrocities with the bushfires.
Mm.
How do you feel about that? Or, like, is there any way to maybe prevent that in the future from happening again? Or
Oh, yeah, I would like to think so, but I think it involves a lot of governmental changes. So,
mhm,
but yeah, it was like, so, especially in January, it was a very heavy-hearted time to be in Australia.
yeah,
We were pretty lucky here in Perth. We had nothing really major. There was some biggish fires in Western Australia, but more in not populated areas. So the only results were that, like the roads were cut, and so we didn't get any deliveries,
yeah,
for
yeah,
a
yeah,
week or two from the rest of Australia, stuff like that. And we had some small local ones, but the ones
mm,
in the eastern states were shocking and just so hard to watch. But
mm,
and yeah, will we be able to prevent them in the future is such a huge question, and
mm,
I hope that finally this stuff is enough to get our governments to take some action. Certainly a lot of more people are a lot more mobilized to
mm,
change things, and it's been quite heartening because there's a lot of really nice, really interesting campaigns to get people to help those affected areas recover. Like,
yeah,
there's one that's called the Empty Esky, and that's hard to explain because I have to explain an esky, I think. So an
okay.
esky is like do you guys say a cooler box, like a
Oh
box
yeah,
where you keep
yeah,
things cool? So
yeah.
it's called an esky in
Okay,
Australia,
yeah,
after like
okay,
Eskimo, I
right.
think. Um, anyway, so there's the Empty Esky campaign. So it's like for people like in Sydney and
Yeah,
Melbourne around there, put the esky in the car and drive out over the weekend to the affected areas and go and buy,
it's brilliant.
buy their farm produce or whatever they're selling and stuff like that. So
Yeah,
stock up on, so to get people back into those areas. And there's a few campaigns like that, and Holiday Here this year, so
mm,
encouraging Australians to holiday here and support those
locally,
local
yeah,
areas.
yeah.
So that's really, it's a really nice outcome, but hopefully we can find a way that we don't have to experience that again, because it was
Yeah,
awful.
yeah, hopefully. Um, what are some of the biggest, I suppose, life lessons that you've learned from traveling?
I kind of feel like everything I've learnt in life I have learnt from traveling, because I've done a lot of traveling, and it's definitely when I'm most open to learning new things. And I guess I count living abroad in that too, because I lived abroad teaching English for about 6 years in a
Yeah,
few different places. But definitely some of the most important lessons are about people. Like, people are really all the same everywhere. There's no need to be judgmental of people's cultures and religions or habits, because
mm,
once you get to know them, yes, they might look different or they might have a different religious habit or whatever, but we are all exactly the same at heart. So that's something I've definitely learned from traveling. And kind of connected to that, I've learned the skill, I hope it's a useful life lesson skill, of being able to talk to any kind of person. I feel like, I mean, I'm kind of a chatterbox as it is, but I can, I didn't used to be, and I got worse when I traveled. It's also a bit genetic, but it's the Irish in me. But,
Yeah.
definitely, especially through teaching English and then, meeting lots of people from different backgrounds as I travel, I feel I have the ability, whoever I meet, wherever I am, I can, get a conversation going. And I think that's turned into being a useful life skill. So, and the other life lesson, I suppose, is confidence. When you travel, you face a lot of there's always a lot of problem solving to do, and there's
Yeah.
different challenges to overcome that you don't normally face in everyday life. And when you keep succeeding with those, you just become more confident in general, I think.
Yeah, that's a good point. I suppose if you were to compare it to like somebody who wouldn't travel as much, or who just goes on the itinerary package holiday, which is totally different to actually traveling in a place on your own or with someone else or with a group just randomly.
Yeah.
Like most of the world is kind of safe and nothing really bad happens ever. And like stuff that you might consider as being a big problem, if you're on like a holiday and something goes wrong, it might be fucking something stupid. Like, when you're traveling, you just, as you say, you just figure it out, and you just look at it differently then if it happens again, or it's not an actual issue,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. You can be much more easygoing about things, I think.
Yeah. Were there any kind of difficult times mentally, when you're maybe traveling for the first time, or in the first couple of trips that you did?
It's a good question. I think I was pretty lucky and never. Well, I mean, if you talk about mental health, there's a couple of things. First of all, before I left to travel like long term, I had a
Mm.
lot of anxiety issues going on.
Yeah.
And when I left and started traveling, they pretty much disappeared. So, shifting where I was going to kind of being triggered and
Mm.
completely changing my life really helped that mental health side.
Yeah.
Um, Occasionally I would have a bit of culture shock. I remember my very first day in Japan,
Mm.
having quite serious culture shock and come from winter to summer, and I had got heat stroke on the first day because I
Yeah.
couldn't understand how to buy a drink. And it was and it was like a major cultural shock, and
Yeah.
it really lasted just a day, but that was kind of a, oh my God, what have I done kind of a day. Let me tell you. I tried to buy something for dinner, and then I can't remember what we bought. We were trying to buy milk, but we couldn't read any of the labels, and we were actually really in a pharmacy rather than a supermarket. And I mean, it was like, looking back, I think, how could I make all those stupid mistakes now that I've spent lots of time in Japan? But at the time, we managed to. So there's that. But honestly, the worst part has been often, and especially when I returned like more permanently back to Australia, was reverse culture shock.
Mm.
And dealing with that, sometimes people call it like a homecoming depression. And I've
Yeah.
really felt like for the first couple of years, I found it so hard to fit back in
Mm.
to my life here in Australia. And, all my friends had kind of just moved on without me. And,
Mm.
we would still catch up, but they didn't want to talk about anything that I wanted to talk about anymore. And I
Yeah.
really missed being abroad. And I found it really, really hard to fit back in with that. So yeah, that was the
That's
worst part.
that's interesting, because I was kind of the same, like, and I was only gone for 5 months, but coming back and settling back into what used to be like your old life.
Yeah.
You kind of got used to ways of, like, especially in Asia, it's so different, that you got used to the way of life there, the food, the pace, the people, and all the rest. And
Yeah.
to come back, really, like, that's the best term to describe it. It's a homecoming depression.
Yeah, yeah. It can
Um,
be really hard.
yeah,
I still hate coming back from any trip, really, no matter how long it is. Like, I always, as much as I try and tell myself that it's silly to waste time feeling that way, once I get home, I just feel really, oh, I don't want to be here. And I have a great life here at home. I
yeah,
have a job I love and lots of great friends, lots of things going for it, but it's just, I would just rather be out there traveling.
yeah. And just on that then, so you have a podcast yourself as well. So tell us, what's the name of it?
So I run the Thoughtful Travel podcast. It's nearly 4 years old, so it's been around a while. 175 episodes, I think now, 76. Anyway, nearly 200.
Brilliant.
And yeah, so I started that. I mean, I've been blogging for many years, but I started the podcast because I love talking about it with other people, and it was such a great chance to, I mean, it's almost as good as traveling. I get to,
Yeah.
chat to people like you all around the globe, hear all your stories and things like that, and it's the second best thing to actually traveling, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
Plus I've been able to develop like a beautiful community of people around it. So yeah, lots of like-minded, really interesting people. So
Super.
I love it. Yeah.
And for anybody watching or listening, I'm on, I think it's episode 174.
That I think is exactly right.
Yeah.
Yes, because it must be. Yeah. And you will be on I don't know what, another episode in the future. But for now,
Woo!
yes, episode 174.
Okay, Amanda. So, traveling around the world, sometimes people go solo. They go with their partner, their spouse, or their family, or in a group. What do you do yourself, or what do you find is the
Mm,
best way to travel?
Oh, I mean, I love any of those options, but most of the time in the last decade, I've been traveling with my son. So he's about to turn 10. And he's taught me a lot about traveling, actually, even though I thought I was going to be teaching him.
Yeah.
But he's a great little traveler and, like a really fun companion to travel with these days. And because of him, I learned to travel more slowly, like to go somewhere and stay for, a week instead of 2 days
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
really get to know a place and not be rushing all the time. I've got to see a lot more playgrounds and more recently, like soccer fields and stuff like that. And I mean, the best part of it is seeing how much travel changes him and seeing how much he learns from it. Like it really, I mean, he's a very spoiled, lucky kid. He's been to like 20 something countries,
Jeez, by
already.
10, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And, and lots of really different situations and different places.
Yeah.
And I can see that it has like literally shaped his personality. I know he would be a different kid if he
Yeah.
hadn't had all those experiences. So, I
Yeah.
mean, it's really fun and rewarding as a parent to be able to give him that.
Yeah.
But it's also just fascinating to watch it. Kids are so smart and they learn new things so quickly, and we always underestimate their ability to adapt to things. And yeah,
Yeah.
it's just, one of the most fun ways for me to travel.
Brilliant. And where were the two of you last, and what was the last country? Or
Our most recently, just last month, we had a week in Malaysia, but
oh yeah.
that was just a quick school holiday jaunt in Kuala Lumpur,
Yeah. Yeah.
which was lovely. But we've been to Malaysia a few times. It's pretty close to Perth, relatively speaking. And last year we were in Denmark and Thailand. So Denmark for a few weeks.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, riding our bikes around Copenhagen, and then had a rental car to look around. And of course, we got to Legoland because every young boy wants to go to the original home of Lego. So
Yeah. Yeah.
that was a big draw card. But yeah, so yeah, yeah,
I-
we've been to lots of places together, and Cambodia and Vietnam the year before. So
yeah. It's interesting. Copenhagen is on my radar as well to visit. It's
it's
supposed to be one of the
awesome.
best kind of eco-friendly cities. I think
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
could be the number one in the world or
Entirely
Europe.
possibly it's the number one.
Yeah.
They're incredible. Some of the stuff I learnt there
Yeah.
is amazing. Yeah, the way, I mean, now they have this rubbish incinerator
Yeah.
that produces all their heating, and on top
Just
of it they have built a ski slope so that you
what?
can just bonus ski down the rubbish incinerator, and a climbing wall on the other side and stuff like this,
Jesus.
and it's so efficient that they've had to
Yeah.
import rubbish to burn it in it
Really?
so
Yeah.
that they can heat, so that they can heat enough.
That
Like
is
that sort of
crazy.
stuff. Yeah.
Like that.
Denmark's amazing like that.
That's such genius, simple foresight. Like,
Yes. Yes.
why can't other countries do stuff
I
like that?
know. Everything about Denmark always strikes me that,
God.
like, they're in a room with a bunch of clever people who are allowed to have lots of ideas, and then they say, oh, or we could do this, or this, why not this? And everyone says, yeah, 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 and then they go the craziest
Yeah.
idea and they do it. Like that's how I feel about, so many things I discovered in Denmark. So it's just a
Jeez.
really amazing way of thinking. Yeah, I was so impressed. I want to go and live there, honestly.
Yeah. Really was looking at it as a city to live in. Now I know it's expensive enough, but for all of those reasons that you just said, like
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
definitely on the radar.
Yeah. You pay high taxes, but you get value for money.
Yeah. So kind of overall, it's a well, it ticks a lot of boxes basically.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Amazing place.
In Asia, then, excluding Japan, what was your most which country had the biggest impact on you?
Ooh, good question. Probably I would say Cambodia.
Yeah.
We traveled there actually with a small group tour where they were running a bunch of empowerment tourism projects there. So we got to
Oh yeah.
work with locals, which the company had been working with for 4 or 5 years,
Mm,
and they, helping them build like sustainable tourism businesses and stuff.
yeah.
And yeah, and so it's one of the poorer places I've ever been, but
Mm,
to be able to see these people who were working so hard to get out of that,
yeah.
and Cambodian people are just so friendly and delightful, and yeah, so that's probably, and certainly had a big impact for my son as well to see
Mm,
that. He often talks about it. So yeah, I guess yeah, I would say Cambodia.
cool. Probably the same for me, and I've only been to 3 Southeast Asian countries: Cambodia, Thailand, Vietnam. But yeah, I think because it's the least developed,
Mm,
you can see the disparity between there and like Thailand is quite westernized, and I think
yep.
Vietnam is going to be the next Thailand, but Cambodia is still kind of down, and it's not too long after the the
Yeah.
terrible
Khmer Rouge.
atrocities there of the Khmer Rouge.
Yeah. Yeah. It's horrifying. Yeah,
Mm.
that's right.
But there is, in saying that, there is a lot of development, and I think a lot of the Chinese are pumping money into property and businesses and stuff in
Yeah.
Cambodia. So
Yeah.
hopefully that kind of pulls it out of their
Yeah, I hope it
depression.
has a positive effect. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. It's a cool place.
it surely is. So in terms of travel resources, is there any kind of other bloggers or books or any kind of guides or stuff that you would go to if you're doing a bit of research or maybe trying to look at a new location to?
Good question. So I guess I tend to just do a lot of Google searching, but I recognize, the blog posts which are a part, not part of, like a big company, or
Yeah,
the
yeah,
kind of the independent bloggers. So
yeah,
I always find that they're more likely to tell me, something useful, and to tell me the truth, and to tell me like it is. So
yeah.
those are the kind of ones I always look out for. And what else do I do to plan? I mean, a lot of it, especially when you live in Australia, the most important part is getting a reasonable airfare,
Mm,
because wherever you're going, it's really far. So I'm always on a bunch of email lists for
yeah, yeah,
like the bonus airfares and the
yeah.
cheapest airfares. So I find that that's kind of a really key thing for me. And apart from that, because I am lucky to have a podcast audience,
Yeah,
I actually just ask my listeners or my readers.
yeah,
So
yeah,
I
yeah.
say, help, I want to do this. Who's got some suggestions? And they just give me they kind of do my research for me. So I kind of cheat. But
Brilliant.
yeah, but after, I've been traveling like pretty extensively for a couple of decades. So I have a kind of a big network of people. Like when I was going to Copenhagen last year, I had already interviewed an American who moved her family to Copenhagen. I'd
Yeah,
already interviewed her for the podcast and got a few tips. But then when I knew I was going, I
cool.
messaged her and said, Erin, help tell me more. And, she was a wonderful resource. And we met up when we were there, and gave me lots of amazing tips. So I always, whatever way I can find to get some insider tips, I find it's, really handy. So I also don't necessarily plan a lot. I like to have
Mm.
plenty of like spontaneous days somewhere just to
Just
see what you see.
book the flight, and then the rest will fall into place.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. The flight's the important thing.
yeah. And when you're, so do you work for yourself then? Is it
Yeah,
okay? So
yeah.
when you're traveling, how do you manage that?
Mm,
Like,
that's the $1,000,000 question. Um, so typically I will do some work while I'm traveling, and um, usually I can plan my work around it. So I do a couple of things that are kind of more time bound, like I teach in
mm,
the university each semester. So
oh yeah,
those weeks I can't travel, but luckily that's
mm,
like 9 weeks twice a year, so I can work around it.
yeah,
Other than that, I'll often try to work really hard before I go, so I've got lots of work done. and then try not to work too much while I'm traveling. But
Yeah.
typically I do. When I went to Malaysia, I had this grand plan because we're only going a week. I was going to leave my computer at home. I didn't leave my computer at home. I needed to take it with me, but I did very little work. And that's the first time in ages that I've had like several days in a row where I did no work. And it was amazing. But
Cool.
I love the work I do. So,
Yeah.
you know, it's a tricky balance. I haven't quite mastered that yet, I have to admit.
Is there any tools or apps that you kind of swear by that really help with that when you're working from different locations and on the go?
Oh, I don't use anything. I don't need anything very fancy. I mean, obviously everything I do is on the cloud, like in Dropbox mostly, just so that I can access it from anywhere or it will be backed up to anywhere. But I don't use anything too fancy. Yeah.
Who would be your number one inspirational business leader?
Ooh, that's a really good question. I look up to quite a lot of typically they're podcasters who run businesses, and that's because that's the kind of role model I look to. And I don't know if they're familiar for other people's circles, but for me, for example, Amy Porterfield, who runs a podcast called, oh gosh, what's it called? Social media. Can't remember, something with social media, but she's someone who I think has managed her business in a really efficient, effective way, earns heaps, doesn't have to work too hard, loves what she does, that kind of thing. So here in Australia, there's a guy called Darren Rouse who runs a business called Pro Blogger. And when I started blogging like 15 years ago, I was living in Germany at the time, and I found out, I came across Pro Blogger at some stage and started following his advice and thought it seemed great. And it wasn't like for another year or two, I realized that the guy behind Pro Blogger was Darren, an ordinary bloke from Melbourne, from Australia. There I was in Germany, taking this advice from someone who was actually like another fellow Aussie. And he's done a lot for the blogging industry in Australia. We've had over the years lots of really interesting conferences and networking events and stuff.
Yeah.
And what I admire about him is he's a really good bloke, as we say, like, a really decent human, really generous with his time and helps others. And for me, like, I would rather be known for that than to be a multi-billionaire.
Yeah. There's a lot of gurus and kind of people online now pushing courses, and everybody's an expert. So it's hard to find the genuine kind of
exactly
people.
Yeah, exactly. So the two I named, that's two I consider to be actually genuine people.
Yeah, very good. Must check them out. So that's Amy Porterfield and Darren Rouse.
Exactly right.
Perfect. I'm just looking at behind you. You seem to have a bit of a library going on.
So I wish I could say that's all there is, but it's just the beginning.
So I have to ask, what's your number one book recommendation?
Oh, okay. Well, okay, I'll tell you nonfiction because so I run a book club as part of my podcast, and last month we reread Alain de Botton's The Art of Travel, which is semi-philosophical but like so insightful and so clever about how it's about my passion, really, about how travel changes us and how we learn from travel, or how the benefits of travel, but written in like the most beautiful way. So we did it for book club. I'm not sure if I've still got it here. No, somewhere nearby. But I had so many passages that I tagged because they were brilliant writing, and just a book that you need to read a little bit at a time, and it makes you stop and think. And not, I don't always have time for books like that. Often it's just I would rather have something that I can read quickly before bed with before I fall asleep. But The Art of Travel, magic book. Just found it. There we go. The Art of Travel.
Alain de Botton. French,
I don't know how to. Well, he's British, but
British.
His name is French, and I can't pronounce it.
Cool. I must check that one out. Cheers.
It's brilliant.
Do you read many kind of business books just to give yourself ideas, or? Yes,
I do. Well, there you go. I've got Hal Elrod's newest book right here, The Miracle Equation. So, Hal Elrod did The Miracle Morning and stuff like that. So that's his newest one. I'm only a little bit through. I often do, and because I often, like for my face-to-face clients here, I have a little bit of a library of business books, that they can use as well. So I do, but often, perhaps more than straight business, often about like habit forming and getting things done,
Yeah.
accountability stuff. Because I find that although my clients come to me ostensibly needing social media and blogging help, what they really, really need is how, as a, they're all self-employed, how to actually get stuff done.
Yeah,
So,
that's the
which I need too. It's a $1 million question of, all self-employed people. So, while I provide them with lots of advice on Facebook and blogging, it's really the actually getting your work done stuff that's important.
what's your favorite quote or motto that you live by, or that sticks out?
So I'm a big fan of Gretchen Rubin. I don't know if you know her. She's written lots of books over the years. The Happiness Project was one of them. And she has a really interesting framework for personalities called the 4 tendencies. So Gretchen Rubin is awesome. But she has a quote. I don't know if she originally said it or if she attributed it to someone, but choose the bigger life. And so when you're making a decision, whatever the decision is, if you just think about choose the bigger life, which of your choices will actually be whatever to you is the bigger life. So I think that's something, it's on my fridge, and it's something I think about often when I'm making a decision.
Choose the bigger life. Nice.
Mm.
Amanda, we're nearly coming to the end now. So I suppose if people want to reach out to you, follow your journey, get in touch maybe for your business services or follow your podcast, how can they do that?
Well, lots of ways, but the most easiest way to find me is, for a start, at NotABallerina.com. So that's where you'll find my podcast and blog. If you listen to podcasts, then the Thoughtful Travel Podcast is where I'm at. And I'm on Instagram and Twitter at Amanda Kendle as well.
Brilliant. Amanda, thanks for coming on the Bootcast. Best of luck with everything, and hopefully we'll meet one day. Cheers.
I hope so too. And thanks so much for having me.
No problem. Bye.